So we're now going to move into our first keynote of the day, which I'm very excited about. It's a total privilege to have with us Dr. Sarah Jane Moore, who will discuss her 2019 ANAT on Country residency in conversation with Vicky Sowry, who is the Director of the Australian Network for Art and Technology. Over to you, Sarah Jane.
The oysters lie in my studio, waiting for stories. I fill them up to brimming with questions, with searching. I talk to them, about them, through them, with them. I dream them. With them, I dream them piled in front of me, like glistening sea country. At times they overwhelm me with their volume, their abundance, their noise, their need. I think through them, with them. They form on piles, on blankets. I contemplate their inside, for I am pearl. I am smooth. I am skin, flesh. I trace the outside. With my thumb, I pile them up. I trace them, I stack them, I count them, I find ways to connect them, to reconnect them to each other, to ourselves and to me. I try to make them whole. I wash them over and over. I turn. I wash them. I wash. I am oyster. I am skin. I am shell, torn and wet. My hands rub barnacles. I'm clinging. I know where oysters lie. They lie inside. They lie inside me and nourish me, and I filter them, and they filter me. They fill me with song. Misheard. Misunderstood. Missed. Oyster. Oyster girl. Oyster song. Oyster skin. I know where oysters lie. Where I would like to thank Lyndon for such a wonderful 1 year, for such a wonderful welcome. We walk the land, we dance the land, and we sing the song. And I thank everyone for gathering today to listen to story, to be with and to be us and to world and walk. And yes, it's true, Sandy opened Wiradjuri country to me as a teenager and split it open, and I still hear those birds singing on country. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to be nourished by the oysters and to be nourished by my relationship with sea country. And I have worked with Vicky, who is going to speak with me about the poem and about the residency that I worked on last year. But I want to talk about being uncomfortable, because in a laboratory, an artist is sometimes uncomfortable. An artist is sometimes an oyster out of water, gulping for air. But the poem that I shared talked about me working through those issues, becoming mindful of the oysters, the insides, the outsides, the microscope, the seeding. When Leah spoke this morning about the importance of seeding, it made me think of the oyster seeded in the stream when it is floating. An oyster seed floats in the water before it finds the substrate, and the substrate can be rock, it can be human made, it can be articulated through human intervention. But the reefs that I think about ancestrally and imagine are ancient reefs. They're ancient reefs where birds gather, eagles come to the reef as a sign of healthy country, healthy reef. And I really celebrate the opportunity in my work to sing about those connections and to think very deeply about the oyster. The oyster as a shell, the oyster, as Sandy so eloquently spoke about, the oyster as a remnant. Early in my residency, Sandy and I met on Bundi Bundi at Bondi Beach, and we talked about currency. We talked not only about the current, but we talked about the oyster as currency. At present, it's my currency. It's how I think, it's how I world, it's how my work emerges. I grind the shells, I work them into my songs. They're always there, like Minanya, like the river at my back, like the ocean. They're always there, thinking, filtering, and being present. So in this keynote, I wanted to be present with the oyster. I wanted to be present with us, with the delegates, with the interconnectivity of our countries. And I'm on Muanina land and seas and rivers, never ceded, sovereign and proud. Proud Luchuita, warrior, proud oyster, filtering forever, past, present, future, filtering, being present. Climate change brings into sharp relief the vulnerability of the oyster. The water's getting hotter. We're polluting more and more, and the oyster's not thriving, just surviving, not thriving, just surviving. Vicky is going to speak and ask some questions, and I'd like to invite her into the space of the oyster with the oyster girl. Yapalingana, Vicky.
So thank you, Sarah Jane. That was beautiful. And so I want to just say that I'm talking to you all today, this morning, from Ghana land, Ghana country. This is where Anat works from. But we do work nationally. And so so I just want to preface this very quickly. Early last year, Anat was really wanting to put First Nations first in our thinking and the way we're delivering our program. And it's I guess, an Uber program called Anat on Country, which is about artist-led and Indigenous-led engagement with country, and particularly around the idea of land misuse, country misuse, mismanagement, and climate change. So when we got an application, we received an application from Sarah Jane for our Synapse Art Science residency program, and we pulled it out and just thought this really is a brilliant first engagement with Anat on Country. And so we talked a lot to Sarah Jane about the work and went up and met a number of times. What's really struck me about your work, Sarah Jane, is I guess I love a simple, not simplistic concept, an elegant concept. And when I look at the oysters, and you just captured it very beautifully then, there's this fabulous cycle which works on a different time too, and anthropocentric time. This idea of filtering and filtering the bad stuff, but equally accreting that over many, 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 years, and building up that accretion. And that becomes the remnant that you talked about, which you're then reworking into another story, into another medium. So I guess I'd like you to, if you could, just elaborate more on, I guess, how that cycle, how you see that speaking to your practice and yourself as an artist.
I think the grinding is really an important cycle for me. And as I grind down the shells and grind other materiality, I really become quite meditative and mindful of a past that is a long time past, and it is quite mindful and meditative and connected. So my relationship with Laura Parker, the Indigenous Scientia Fellow at UNSW, is one of muse. It is also one of interrelativity. It is also one of relating to her data. So I relate to her data and respond to her data as it emerges, and that is in counterpoint with the songs that I write in counterpoint with the grinding of the oyster shells. And since moving into digital spaces, that has put another layer in and with the worlding of the oysters, because Laura and I are away from each other now, and we're also away from the Baladari, the Bundangi Ghoul, the Sydney Rockies are distant. I always want to bring them close. I'm asking for them to be sent. I ask for those wild entities to come back to me so I can repurpose them. So you're right. The very question that you pose or you muse on, Vicky, is very important with the the very materiality that we work with. I grind country.
Wow.
I country in me, you know.
Look, thanks, Leah, because that really picks up. We've just received a comment/question from Stephen Durbach, and he's saying, you know, your presence is profound. Where do you begin and the oyster end? Is there a boundary? I think you've really picked up on that. And I think equally the boundary, I never saw a boundary between yourself and Laura. And you talk of Laura as being your muse. I've watched you two work together, and there's just this incredible simpatico, and you talk about relationality and how important relations are in these, I guess, in these types of interdisciplinary relationships. If you're able to come together and be able to speak the same language. I guess one thing which really struck me is the duty of care, the empathic, and again, this comes back to Stephen's comment, you know, the empathic relationship that both yourself and Laura have with the Baladuri. And you told me recently of a tragedy in Laura's life. I don't know if you've mentioned that today.
The tragedy for the oyster story, of which you speak, to use your words, Stephen, is profound, because the Baladari can be climate proofed for the lab, but those Baladari are not wilded. When they wild, they're not viable. So there's many more learnings for the artists and the science to come together to make a future for our Sydney Rocky that was an intrinsic part of culture and currency and song and eating and trading on the big island, because I'm on the little island now. The Sydney Rocky is an iconic and relational being. It related to the eagles, related to the water, the sea, the brine, the salt, the river, the Gunma, where the salt meets the river. And I think that those elements of this work, which last year was so positive, the algae, the success, the climate proofing of the oysters, to be hit with death, for me, is quite profound. There is the life beyond that. There is the work beyond that. There is the wilding oyster. It will survive. We will get this through. We will make this work. And Laura is determined, and her collaborators are determined, and the science will speak. And for me, that is profound. The science is profound. And I love that living data, reading the reports, scintillating.
Thank you so much, Sarah Jane Moore. That was an absolutely remarkable keynote. What a amazing way to start this day. It's really a total privilege to hear you speak and sing, and thank you for joining us and sharing your work so generously with us. It's this project is such a powerful example of interdisciplinary creativity, and how amazing it was to actually hear those oyster shells grinding over the live stream as well, and speaking so passionately about that intersection between art, science, and the knowledge that's held in country. And thank you, of course, to Vicky Sowry, Director of ANAT, who was joining us then and who, of course, supported this incredible ANAT on Country project, of which the amazing project that Sarah Jane was just talking about was supported through. So we'll be hearing more from Vicky throughout the day, who is joining us on our closing panel and chairing another session later on. And we hope you'll stay with us throughout the day as well, Sarah Jane. But thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible.